in the define phase, the different various objectives that we have or deliverables that we have. First, we define the customer requirement called as V.O.C or voice of customers. Then we define the process requirement called as critical to quality. We define the process using SIPOC, or we call as a macro level process map. SIPOC is an acronym for suppliers, input, process, output, and customer. I'll be explaining that with an example. Then we define the project using project charter. So these are the 4 deliverables of define phase. So when we say we are completed a define phase, it means that this 4 deliverables are completed in the define phase. We define the customer requirement by V.O.C or voice of customer. We define the process requirement called CTQ or critical to quality. We define the process in which we are doing the project using SIPOC or a macro level process map. And we define a project using project charter. And let us see what is this V.O.C is all about. V.O.C is defining the customer requirement or what the customer require from our process, or V is called as V.O.C. So when we ask the customer what do they need, or we understand from the customer what the customer requirement from the process, so that is called as V.O.C or voice of the customer. There are different ways in which the customer information can be taken or the customer requirement can be taken. So there can be certain research methods can be used, certain listening posts are there where, or listening methods are there, or using an internal and external data, we can understand the customer requirement. Research methods usually is done when a project team is understanding the V.O.C or they want to understand the requirement of the customer. They do an interview with the customers and a one-to-one interview with the customers and try to understand their requirement. Or they do a group discussion with a group of people called as, which is representing the customers, and we call that as focus group discussions. It can be surveys that we can do using a questionnaire, sending a survey through an email or through a telephonic survey. We can send it to the customers and try to understand their requirement. Or we can observe as a project team, we can observe what the customer requirement is by looking into the behavior of the customer or what they're looking for. So by observing the customer also, we can try to understand what the customer requirement. So it's based upon which industry we are looking into and who is our customers. We select some of the research methods when the project team looks into understanding the customer requirement. Sometimes we can understand the customer requirements by listening to the complaints from the customers or from a customer sales service representative who listen to the customer, so we can understand from those customers what do they. So sales representatives can tell us what the customer requirement is. When we are looking to the billing information or billing department, they can try to say what the customer requirement is. Account receivable, when we check, we can understand what the requirement is. Or we can do, we can collect from the customers what the complaint they have, or by listening to those customers, we can understand what the customer requirement is. External or internal data can be from a company information. The existing company information may have certain customer requirement or a client requirements can be done. From a industry experts, we can do it. From an external agency, we can try to get a secondary data from an external agency we are trying to give and try to understand from them. Ask these customers and try to understand what their need is. Or from a competitors, we can try to understand what the customer requirement is. So any method can be used when we do a project. Most of the time, the research methods are used. When we do a project, we do this different research methods and try to understand the requirement of the customers. So more details, we'll take you in detail when you come for a green belt training. We'll be saying how each one of those methods can be used. So any method can be used. Mostly we do a research methods like the interview or the focus group or surveys are mostly used to understand, define the customer requirement. If a majority of the customers are having a complaints, then only those complaints are listened. So there are a lot of pros and cons or advantages and disadvantages into all those research methods. So you'll see any one method can be used, and survey is the most commonly used method to understand and define a customer requirement when we do a project. So V.O.C is voice of the customers, or call us what the customer expectations from the process can be.